Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me today. My name is not as important as the years I've spent at sea. I'm a retired naval officer, 50 years old now, but still very much tied to the rhythm of the ocean. After decades of standing watch on the bridge, I've learned that the sea never repeats the same story twice. And on August 11th, 2025, it told a story that many of us will not forget. At 12:04 UTC, the waters near Scarborough Shoal appeared calm, almost deceptively calm. Just 12 nautical miles from the reef, the Philippine Coast Guard cutter BRP Suluan was heading north, tasked with escorting two small civilian relief boats carrying food and fuel. On her stern, the Chinese Coast Guard cutter CCG-3104 was bearing down quickly, water cannon already unleashed. Those streams may look harmless on a screen, but I know better. They can break glass, tear equipment from its mounts, even knock men into the sea. Then came the shape from the port side. Cutting through the haze was a Chinese Navy destroyer, hull number 164, pushing hard through disputed waters. 3 ships, one narrowing triangle of sea, and seconds left to react. Out here, silence on the radio can weigh heavier than any order. For me, the troubling part wasn't just the danger, it was the thought that 2 vessels flying the same flag were drifting toward each other with no room left to maneuver. Was it a mistake born of overconfidence, or the result of tactics carried too far? What do you think? If you've enjoyed sailing through this story with me, don't forget to drop a like and subscribe. Think of it as tossing a small line to an old sailor. I'll keep bringing you more true tales from the sea. Support the channel, support a sailor, and let's keep the conversation afloat. Once the Suluan cleared the reef's shadow, the chase turned into something more deliberate. The Chinese Coast Guard cutter 3104, a vessel of about 1,500 tons, pushed its twin diesels to the limit. Spray boiled from its bow as it surged forward, closing the gap on the Philippine patrol ship and the 2 slower civilian craft it was shielding. For anyone who has spent time at sea, it was obvious. The goal was not subtle. The water cannon roared to life, sweeping the decks of the Suluan with powerful streams that could knock a man overboard in seconds. On paper, they're labeled non-lethal. In practice, at close range, those jets can shatter glass, rip away antennas, and leave decks slick with flooding. For the crew of the Suluan, every blast meant bracing behind armored shields, gripping whatever railing or steel they could find. But what stood out to me was the cutter's approach. Instead of tailing directly from astern, 3104 swung wide to port, attempting a textbook intercept, cutting across the Suluan's bow to force her off course. At nearly 20 knots, the margin for error narrows to a razor's edge. The Philippine ship held steady, careful not to make a move that could be twisted as aggression. Radio calls from the Suluan went unanswered. Sirens blared over the hiss of the water cannon. And then came the miscalculation. Through the mist and spray, the bulk of the Chinese Navy destroyer loomed larger. Hull number 164 was not maneuvering for harassment. It was holding its course through the contested waters. But the cutter's intercept path wasn't only crossing the Suluan's line. It was cutting directly into the destroyer's track. The cutter's captain, focused on his chase, pressed through the intercept line without registering just how little space remained. By the time the destroyer's crew spotted the danger and sounded signals, it was too late. The bow of 3104, angled across, slammed forward into the destroyer's port side. The sound of steel on steel is unforgettable. The cutter's bow crumpled inward like paper beneath a fist, its forward gun mount twisted in its housing, its shield warped by the impact. Internal bulkheads groaned and split. On the destroyer, the damage was superficial by comparison. Long, jagged scrapes gouged down the port plating, streaks of bare metal where paint sheared away. But the shock traveled through her hull, rattling fittings and shaking crew from their posts. On the cutter's foredeck, sailors who had been visible moments before vanished from sight, thrown back by the sudden halt. Whether injured or simply knocked down was unclear. In the first seconds after impact, chaos reigned. The destroyer's horn blared. The cutter's engines went silent. From a lifetime at sea, I can tell you, collisions are rarely just about bent steel. They reveal fractures in coordination, in discipline, and in judgment. So I ask you, what mattered more here? The twisted bow of a cutter, or the silence that let 2 ships of the same flag collide head-on? In the first seconds after impact, the scene was nothing short of chaos. The destroyer's horn blared across the shoal, while the cutter's engines went dead. The bow of CCG 314 sat low in the water, buckled and submerged, the vessel rocking unsteadily in the swell. In polite operational terms, she was unseaworthy. In reality, she was finished. A pursuit meant to intimidate had ended with one of China's own ships crippled in full view of the very vessel it was chasing. On the deck of the BRP Suluan, disbelief mixed with shock. Moments earlier, her crew had braced against another blast from the water cannon. Instead, they watched as the Chinese cutter slammed head-on into its own Navy's destroyer, sending a deep metallic boom rolling across the sea. Through binoculars, Philippine officers spotted crewmen on the cutter's forward deck stumble, clutch railings, and in some cases disappear behind the mangled bow. Without heavy protective gear like a warship's sailors, even a sudden stop at speed can hurl a man several meters. The response from the Philippine side was immediate and professional. Over VHF, the Suluan's operator broadcast, "Chinese vessel, we can provide medical assistance. We can assist in search and rescue." The message was repeated 3 times, in English and in Mandarin. Each call was met with silence. The destroyer's crew seemed entirely focused on assessing their own hull, with damage control teams inspecting scrape marks along the port side. Aft on the cutter, its sailors clustered away from the destroyed bow, moving slowly and cautiously. From my years at sea, I know silence can carry more weight than words. Accepting help from the very ship you were chasing would be politically awkward. Better to handle things internally, even if precious minutes mattered for anyone injured. But it was a telling choice. The refusal to acknowledge distress or assistance spoke louder than the collision itself. Meanwhile, the 2 civilian relief boats pulled further clear, staying well out of sight. For them, what should have been a routine delivery of food and fuel had turned into a front row seat to an international embarrassment. So let me put the question to you. If you were in command that day, would you have accepted aid from your rival in a life-or-death moment, or chosen silence? Scarborough Shoal may look like little more than a ring of shallow reefs in turquoise water, but in the South China Sea, it has long been a flashpoint. From the perspective of international law, the location seems straightforward. The shoal sits only 124 nautical miles from the coast of Luzon, placing it well within the Philippines' 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS. By that standard, these waters should belong to Manila, yet the reality on the water tells a different story. In 2012, Chinese vessels seized control of the shoal and have never left. Since then, Beijing has maintained its claim through a rotating presence, Coast Guard cutters, maritime militia craft, and, when they want to send a stronger signal, fully armed warships. This layered blockade is not written in law books but enforced in steel and hulls. The Philippines has never accepted this situation as permanent. Each patrol that ventures near Scarborough is more than routine. It is a statement, a declaration that Manila will not concede rights awarded under UNCLOS. The 2016 arbitral tribunal ruling supported this stance, declaring China's expansive claims invalid under international law. Beijing dismissed the ruling outright. For those of us who have served at sea, the contrast is familiar. What the law may say on paper is not always what plays out on the water. This is what makes Scarborough particularly sensitive. It is not just about reefs or fishing grounds, though those matter to local communities. It lies at the edge of one of the world's busiest shipping lanes. The South China Sea carries more than 60% of global maritime trade. An estimated $3.4 trillion in oil, containers, and bulk carriers pass through these waters each year. Control here is not just a matter of territorial pride. It touches economies worldwide. From a strategic standpoint, Scarborough sits within reach of China's expanding military outposts in the South China Sea. These artificial islands, fitted with runways, radar, and anti-ship missile batteries, allow Beijing to monitor and, if it chooses, control large stretches of sea. Were Scarborough itself developed in the same way, its position would extend that reach closer still to the Philippine mainland. For sailors, these details aren't abstractions. They shape every patrol, every intercept, every tense standoff in waters where the law, politics, and raw presence meet. Within hours of the collision, Manila made its position clear. Philippine Coast Guard spokesman Commodore J. Torella called the event atrocious and inane behavior, accusing the Chinese cutter's captain of violating COLREGs, the international regulations designed to prevent collisions at sea. He emphasized that the maneuver wasn't just reckless, it had risked lives on all three ships and could have triggered a wider crisis. Torella also underscored one detail that struck me as significant. The Suluan's crew had immediately offered assistance, medical and search and rescue, and China refused. That says a lot, he told reporters. From my experience, sometimes what is left unsaid speaks volumes. In Beijing, the narrative was very different. Chinese Coast Guard spokesman Gan Yu acknowledged a maritime encounter, but made no mention of a collision. Instead, he described the events as part of monitoring, pressing, blocking, and controlling, actions he framed as lawful enforcement within what China regards as its territorial waters. Chinese state media released no images of the damaged cutter. The contrast between the two accounts could not have been sharper. One side described a dangerous miscalculation, a near disaster that highlighted the risks of aggressive maneuvers. The other treated it as little more than routine enforcement, not even worth emphasizing. The next day, Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. addressed the nation, vowing that ships would continue operating in these waters. "We will not be deterred. These are our fishermen, our seas, and our duty," he said firmly. For outside observers, the difference in tone was striking. Manila painting the incident as proof of reckless behavior, Beijing presenting silence as control. And in the South China Sea, silence after an incident can often be as telling as the event itself. For those of us who have spent our lives at sea, what happened on August 11th fit into a wider pattern we've seen before. Analysts call it gray zone tactics, measures that assert control without crossing the line into open war. Instead of gunfire, there are water cannons. Instead of missile strikes, there are rammings. The goal is pressure, to remind the other side who controls the waters, while staying below the threshold that might trigger a larger military response. Scarborough Shoal has become one of the clearest stages for this playbook. Over the years, Chinese Coast Guard cutters have blocked resupply missions to Philippine outposts, used lasers to temporarily blind sailors, and even rammed fishing boats. Each time, the justification has been the same: enforcing sovereignty. And each time, Manila has treated its patrols near Scarborough as a statement that international law still applies. That's why the August 11th collision stood out. It wasn't the Philippines that suffered the worst of it. It was China's own cutter, disabled in front of its Navy destroyer. To me, that underlined the risks of tactics pushed too far. The gray zone thrives on careful calibration, but here the balance slipped. Friendly steel met friendly steel. The lesson is sobering. Even when the intent is harassment, not battle, the ocean allows little margin for error. And when tactics designed to intimidate end up hurting your own side, the danger becomes plain for all to see. So here's the question: will incidents like this make commanders more cautious, or will they only lead to tighter, more aggressive layers of enforcement? Out on the sea, the difference between those two paths could define the future. After decades at sea, I've learned one truth: the ocean has no patience for pride. Steel can be replaced, paint can be reapplied, but lives lost are gone forever. The August 11th collision was a reminder that even routine harassment carries the risk of tragedy. Nations may disagree over maps and claims, but sailors, no matter their flag, face the same unforgiving sea. My hope, as someone who has seen too many near misses, is simple: that leaders and crews alike remember restraint is not weakness. On the water, peace is not just an ideal, it is survival.